We are going to be talking about being mediocre, and a fascinating topic. I think it's another one of these topics that when we talk it through, we'll dig a little deeper, dig a little deeper, dig a little deeper, and discover a whole host of things that sit underneath that. But what inspired it was a couple of things. Last week, before we had our live chat, we were chatting as we do for a couple of minutes just to touch base. And I asked how your week was, and you said that you had a lot on your plate, and study is a big part of your world now. You've got a lot of assignments due, and we talked about letting go and prioritizing and what can let go. And it brought up this topic of mediocrity, where you said, I'm not going for distinctions, I'm just going for a pass. And I just about fell off my chair because I know you well enough now to know that that's a big statement coming from my perfectionist friend. And so that was one thing. And we kind of went there for a bit, then we parked it. And then earlier on this week, maybe yesterday, day before, I read a post by, and I want to make sure I get this right, the Midlife Anti-Crisis on Substack. I love these great writers on Substack and all the topics that we explore. And Jennifer wrote about being mediocre. And that's what I thought, okay, there's something here. The universe is speaking. We are got our little antennas primed for this topic. So why don't we go there?
Yeah,
Shall we go there, Erica?
we absolutely should, because I do think that, even just the title of that, I think that's what Jennifer's article was titled, Being Mediocre. And it gave me feelings.
Mm.
It gave me feelings. I don't want to be mediocre. But you're right. We've had these conversations recently about readjusting our expectations. And it's something that I see a lot in my work with women, is that this tendency to be a perfectionist, to want to be the best, to want to do a really good job. It's so common. It's like in us. And I think that it's a really, really particularly common way for women to live entire lives. But it's exhausting as well. And I think it's also so impossible. We've talked before, and I often talk about this idea of being imperfect as humans, that is by definition what a human is, imperfect. And yet we're constantly striving for perfection. And so it's no wonder that it's exhausting, because it's actually impossible. And so I think it's a really good topic. And like I said, it gives me feelings. It gives me feelings. We were talking before we hit record about the fact that, yeah, I have made that statement, right, to you, that at the moment I can't try to be a perfect student. It's not possible. There is no way to do that within the bounds of what I'm working with. And yet it's such a key part, or I had thought of it as such a key part of my identity, as being somebody who is a good student, somebody who puts in their best effort, somebody who, does well. That's been always a really important part of how I see myself. And so I think this quest to be more mediocre for all of us, it's got sort of like a push-pull element to it, right? Like it's so alluring, because it's like, that sounds peaceful. That sounds, a little less effortful, a little more doable, a little more achievable. And yet there's something about it that also feels a little, is that for me?
Yeah, because of the negative connotations, right?
Yeah.
And I'm guilty of that too. So again, not my understanding of mediocrity is being reframed, because in the past, when A-type personality, striving to do all the things and loving it, now postmenopausally, I'm going, so not doing that. That with that reframe now, and I think Jennifer talked about this in her article too, is with that reframe, it's being mediocre is not a bad thing, whether there's good or bad or however we want to think of it. But there were so many negative associations with mediocrity. And I used to say to my kids when they were growing up, we don't do mediocre. We don't strive for mediocrity. What's going on with this world? Everyone's striving for mediocrity. But now
Mm.
I think there needs to be a reframe around what the meaning of that word is. And I should have looked it up before we came in. There must be an Oxford
Mm.
version of what being mediocre is. But I wonder if that reframe is also a context that's changed for me too. And you're 42, you're maybe perimenopausal, coming into those years, maybe not. Your kids are much younger. You've still got a business that demands much of you that you love doing. And I'm at the other end, not doing all of that now. So I just wonder whether in the new context that I see my world in, that I see my value, my identity is not wrapped up in that so much anymore.
Mm.
And I think that comes with learning to let go. And I believe there's a huge control element in all of this. Yeah,
Mm.
I think control is something that um, I might be wrong, but I feel is part of this conversation because learn
Yeah.
to let go and let others do it their way or take that away from you, that's hard to do too. And it is wrapped up with identity very firmly. So I'm a mother.
Mm.
My kids constantly reminding me as they're now in their early 20s, probably from about 4 or 5 years ago, Mum, you don't have to do that anymore. Mum, it's okay. I've got this. Mum, let go. You're driving us mad. Let it go. So, you know, you're not in that phase yet. Am I making sense? I think it's
Yeah,
touching
you are.
who we are and what we do and
Mm.
that too.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but what I think I'm hearing when you talk about this control piece is it's actually more about controlling the perceptions that other people have of us in some way, right? Because by continuing to over deliver for your children, for instance, then you get to kind of be the good mum. You get to be the perfect mum, which we know doesn't exist, but we get to kind of
What's
have that
expected.
identity. I
Mm,
think so much of what we do outwardly, this idea of, overachieving or being perfect, it's in this quest for acceptance, for love, for admiration, for feeling enough, right? And so I think that when we talk about mediocrity, it really is about acceptance of I'm enough even when I'm average.
yes.
And
Uh,
so that control, what I hear, and like I said, correct me if I'm wrong, but the control element to me that I'm kind of hearing reflected in what you're saying is what we have to let go of is our desire to control those narratives outside of ourselves, right? And I think that that's really quite profound because we have less control than we even think anyway, right?
Oh, absolutely. Mind blown. Yes. When do we realize that? Hello? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so much of that lack of desire to be mediocre, I think really does come back to I want to be accepted, I want to be loved, I want to be,
Needed.
needed, I wanna be enough, And we have rarely been told that mediocre is enough, right? You come home with a C, nobody gives you a gold star for that. They they say, "Well, why couldn't you have gotten a B? Why couldn't you have gotten an A?" Or, when it's really wrapped up in your identity, you are an A grade student. Why did you come home with a C?
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing where I think we've never seen mediocrity celebrated or even accepted. Let's be honest. We celebrate the really extraordinary. And I
Mm.
think, you mentioned before, like I'm still and will be for many, many years, decades, probably in the thick of my business. I run a really mediocre business in terms of revenue, in terms of impact, right? Like I'm not trying to have millions of followers. I'm not trying to have, multi-million dollar
Mhm.
like if that was my measure, I am failing miserably.
Mhm.
I am quite happy to have a mediocre business because I want one that is sustainable for me energetically, right? But when I go out into the world and I look at what is a business supposed to look like, I can assure you nobody's promoting mediocre businesses as the benchmark, as the gold standard, as the thing to be admired and revered. It's all about the six and seven figure businesses, right? And so I think part of this conversation around being mediocre is that how often are you comparing yourself against an average? Almost never. You're almost always comparing yourself against the outliers, which we all think we're trying to, emulate. So I don't know. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent
No,
here, but
no, no, no.
um,
No, you're not. I'm with
yeah,
you. I'm with
you're
you.
with me. You're with me. I feel like that a big part of this is not having good models for it, not having good language for it. You know, even mediocre is probably not a great word for it because it's got so much tied up in it. Um, I want to say one more thing actually that's just popped into my head. You
Mhm.
said my value, comes from. And I want to add that part of the reason that, mediocrity really appeals to me at the moment is because it is aligned with my values, right? We seem to loop around the same conversations over and over again. Identity, values,
Yes.
to name but a few. Um, my values, there's nothing in my values that talks about striving for perfection. There's nothing in my values that talks about, you know, um, running myself dry in the pursuit of
Whatever.
whatever, right? Um, so
And
yeah,
yet, and yet,
mm,
and yet, we do.
exactly.
So it's almost like this. I wonder if a lot of the stress then is this tension between the malalignment between your values and how you're living.
A
You're not
100%.
living your values in this regard. So, yes, and to your point, which is a really big one and a fantastic point, is it it's a relative concept. So that gets down to measuring it. So how do we measure success? How do we measure performance? Is it like today I went to the gym and I'm lifting the biggest weight I've ever done? Fantastic. That's great. So what? What does that mean? Well, it aligns with my value of looking after my health. Great. Perfect. Great. Makes me feel good. Makes me want to shout it to the rooftops. But in exhaustion of trying to do everything and I still think control everything because, yes, it's wrapped up in who I am and what I've always done and what's expected of me and all of those identity triggers. Um, that's when we feel less than, and to what end? Like, are we trying to prove something here? What are we trying to prove? Are we trying to prove it to ourselves or are we trying to prove it to the rest of the world?
Both.
And why? At the end of the
Both.
day, and why? Where's
Yeah.
the value in that?
Yeah. And it's interesting, I think when, sort of putting my counseling hat on, often when we engage in therapy of any kind, something that will become apparent is like what beliefs drive us.
Mm.
And when you say like, what are we trying to prove? Most of us are trying to prove something, right? We're trying to prove something because somewhere along the line we've come to believe that that's necessary, right? That I have to prove that I'm lovable, that I have to prove that I'm successful, that I have to prove that I'm worthy. And then, right? And then I will get the love, the acceptance, the whatever it is that I've been craving all along. And we think we're looking for that out there. My opinion is that we're often looking for it in here, right? And so perhaps that's where the sort of acceptance of mediocrity comes from. Because I guarantee you're not going to get it out there, right? The world is not celebrating mediocrity.
And you're never gonna be enough, right?
You're never going to be
You're never
enough,
gonna be enough. It's a hiding
not by
from
those measures. not
No,
by
not
those measures,
mhm.
right? That's the irony. You already are enough. But if you continue to use those measures, you never will be. You'll never get the evidence that you're craving.
That's right. And all the
And
hurt
so
that comes
perhaps,
with that. Mm,
yeah, that's right. And so perhaps the mediocrity, like the acceptance of that, is to finally say, well, I'm enough without proving it. I'm enough without being exceptional. I'm enough without the A grade. A C is enough. It's really interesting. So I've been a yoga teacher for 15 years, and one of the modalities that I teach is called somatic exercise. And somatic exercise is based on quite a different concept to yoga, um, in terms of like the biomechanics of what we're doing. And one of the things that I often talk about in my somatic exercise classes is cruising for a C. So I will say, when you are moving in this somatic exercise informed way, we're not striving, we're not pushing, we're not looking for the most sensation. What we're actually doing is literally cruising for a C. You're looking for a pass. You're not actually looking for the, all the things that we do perhaps when we're lifting weights, which is not to say that that's wrong. It's just stepping into a different way of being, right? And I think that's what we often don't have the opportunity to do. We don't often have the opportunity to step out of striving
mm,
because everything in our world is striving. Every metric that you can think of asks you to strive and push and, push the boundaries, push the limits. Income, appearance,
mm,
success on any level is looking for that. And so, I often, I love teaching somatic exercise, not because I think it's the only modality that does anything good for the body, of course not, but because it allows us to step out of that ordinary striving way of being and cruise for a C. And when do you get permission to do that? So
mm,
infrequently.
mm, mm.
So infrequently.
Yeah. Cruising for a C, and when C is enough.
When it's enough, yeah, and it won't always be.
Mm,
I don't cruise for a C with my clients. I don't sit there and think, "Oh, well, I'm a good enough therapist." I wanna be a really good one because I want people to feel really supported when they see me. But I'm also balancing that out, right, um, with my self-care, with, all of these other things. So I think it's important that becomes aligned with our values, right?
mm.
My value is not burnout.
Yeah, and I'm really curious, when you just said, "I don't wanna be a mediocre counselor," again, I come back to by what measure?
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
like, by what measure? How are you measuring that? Because
Mm,
yeah, and maybe this goes to the heart of it. I'm gonna do a bit more reading after this.
yes.
Maybe this goes to the heart of it. What if we didn't have the measures that we have? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, how do you
What
even know?
how do you know? What is a
Yeah.
C? What's an A? What does an A look like? My A
Mm,
as a on the receiving end of your therapy is going to be very different to
sorry.
your A as the practitioner potentially. There might even be a mismatch there. So what if there wasn't a bleh, mismatch?
Mismatch.
And what if that became the measure?
Yeah.
That
Yeah, absolutely. And why in my mind is I'm happy to be a mediocre business owner, right, and not strive for multi 8 figures, but I can't be a mediocre counselor. That's a really
yeah,
good point, and I saw your brain do something and I was like, "Oh, I've said something that's triggered something there." That was really interesting because I think you're right. It's partly it is the negative connotation that that word has, right? As though to be mediocre is to not quite be good enough,
yes.
or to not
Not to
care.
care. Yeah, not to care.
Yeah,
It and that's just so not
it's not
true.
true.
I think we need to redefine what this word means.
Mm,
And should it even really exist?
we
Like,
need to go to the thesaurus.
yeah, and
We
I
need
re
our synonyms.
we do, and we need to go to the ancients on this, the ancient wisdom, because I reckon if you look into, say, Buddhist teachings or something
Mm.
like that, this probably wouldn't even exist. Or if it did,
Mm.
it would have a very different context. You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think the context, I'm
Mm.
just guessing here because 'cause I'm not a Buddhist, but, I'm guessing that it would, like you said earlier, it's about turning the spotlight back on me, not measuring against what others expect or what I perceive others expect of me, but
Yeah.
what do I value and how do I measure my successes and what that means for me. And
Mm.
tricky because naturally what happens out there and what others are doing, the whole comparison trap and all the rest of that, that will influence, how we
Yeah.
find success for ourselves. And with that, are we mediocre? Um,
Yeah.
but I think, yeah, the whole compassion and care and kindness thing comes into it too, because you're a fantastic counselor and you're a brilliant mum and you're a great business owner. And yes, but and yet, you know, like you said, you've settled for mediocre in your business sense, but when you're measuring it up against another business where and you're right, in society, success means the most money in our
Yep.
society. It doesn't mean that everybody's life that you touch, you make it a better experience for them. What if that was the measure? Rather
And I guess we get to choose the measure, right? Maybe that's the whole thing about being mediocre is that you get to choose what you're measuring against. And I was thinking as you were talking about the Buddhist sort of, just considering where that might stem, or where it might take us. I was thinking a little bit about yogic philosophy, and yeah, I think there's probably a lot more we could talk about in this area, but being at peace in yourself, I think, is a huge part of a huge part of this conversation. And I don't know that we ever get there by striving to measure ourselves against some external measure. The phrase that keeps coming into my mind is, that "go hard or go home," which is obviously an anti, completely at odds with the idea of
mediocrity.
being mediocre, but it really speaks to our fear of mediocrity,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it is such an interesting topic. I would love to know what people listening think because
Mm.
I can feel both of us wanting to dive down rabbit holes, and it's one of those topics that it could take us on such a philosophical kind of quest, which I love. I love those quests. Um, But yeah, I would love for anyone listening, to shoot us a message or to leave a comment or something and just tell us what their thoughts are on mediocrity. Maybe even where, you've embraced mediocrity and how that has had an impact on your life. Um, or where you're striving and you notice that that's not working for you anymore. Like, I would love to hear some stories, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would too. And I might put a few DMs out there too and see if I can get some comments that way from others
Yeah.
who, I've been tuning into a couple of women who talk about, sabbaticals and taking time out and all of that. And I think they would have some awesome things to say on this topic. And I made a couple of quick notes when you were talking about go hard and go home. The other phrase that springs to mind in tense opposition to that is when enough is plenty.
Yeah.
And I think that is the tension that we're talking about here. Um,
Mm,
in many ways, the whole
mhm,
cultural go hard, go home. And if you're not going hard enough, you're not putting enough in, you're not being good enough, and blah, blah, blah. That's the negative, kind of thing. But the
mm,
whole notion of contentment and when enough is plenty and to feel and live that,
mm,
I don't know that mediocrity has a place there, you know?
mm.
That's
Yeah.
fulfillment.
Yeah, which is maybe a different word. Yeah, maybe it's just a different word for a similar experience. Yeah, and I think one final thought, I think there is a lot of grief in the human recognition that we will never be perfect. And I wonder if it's that grief that keeps us trying.
Yeah.
You know, like it's so uncomfortable to accept that we're going to continually fall short. And so if we just keep trying, we keep scrambling under the surface to not be mediocre, does that keep a lid on that grief and that frustration and that anxiety potentially? Like, is it actually a really remarkable avoidance strategy for sitting with the reality that to be human is to be imperfect and there ain't nothing you can do about that?
Avoidance, absolutely it is. I
Yeah.
would like to go down that rabbit hole. I'm gonna do that after this chat and just see
I
where
will
that
follow you down any rabbit hole, Anita.
I think this is such a big topic, and maybe, we've spoken about contentment before, talking about contentment, and I wonder if that's a nice counterpoint to this
Yeah,
conversation as well, and I think of my husband
yeah,
whenever I think of contentment, and I think of Alex, my husband's you would look at what he's doing now, and some might judge that and go, "Well, what a mediocre life." Like, he's now making furniture instead of running a, you know, intense big organization. In his mind, nah, I'm content.
yeah.
I'm good. I'm really good.
Which perhaps also talks to the seasonality of all of these things too,
Yeah,
right? Had he
yeah,
lived his whole life like that, what would have experienced? What would his
yes,
experience have been? And, there might be areas in our life where, yeah, we do strive and mediocrity is not enough. And yet in other areas it really is, and I think we see that it's interesting how we automatically go to the polars, right? Like to the polarization of we're either striving or we're mediocre. Like there's kind of, whereas my brain just went, well, maybe we're both. And it's about recognizing when we want or need or, I don't know, there's something in there that feels seasonal or something in there that feels like a both and, right? But accepting that perhaps they nest within each other. There's room for striving when that feels appropriate. There's room for
yeah,
mediocrity when that feels like the need. So it's not about, anybody who's striving is getting it wrong. I think it's more being able to balance out these ideas, I guess, and looking at how it serves you. Like you said earlier, is it sort of serving, when you strive at the gym? Yeah, it is, because it makes you feel this, and this. Um, and again, the striving is relative to you, right? So it
mhm.
isn't mediocre, but maybe by some other measure it is. So,
Maybe in someone else's
it's
standard, it is
yeah, so
absolutely
it's
not
like
me.
whose standards?
Mhm.
So yeah, a million rabbit holes, but I love it. What a great topic to explore.
Yeah, yeah, I think so, and I think you're right. That whole framework, the context, in which
Mm.
what lens are we viewing? What perspective are we viewing the definition of what mediocrity means to us, I think is really valid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. In different
And it
situations.
gives Yeah, it gives you just a way maybe of stepping outside of, we're creatures of habit. So if we've always strove, I don't know what's the right tense there.
Sounds
If
good.
we've always been striving, then we will do that without really thinking. And so perhaps it's more also about being able to introduce reflection and agency, right? To recognize that, yeah, maybe you do choose to strive, maybe you do choose to be mediocre, but recognize that you have a choice, right? You're not just driven by habit or by comparison or by those pesky, core beliefs that tell you that you're not good enough. So,
Yeah, and as you often say to me, holding them together, one in each hand
yeah,
at the same time, and recognizing that that's I think that's a sign of wisdom and maturity when you can hold
absolutely.
2 things together at the same time and be at peace with that, and to
Yeah,
be aware of it and to be okay with it. Yeah.
yeah. It's very reflective of that, the nature of humanity of being contradictory and imperfect. Two seemingly opposing things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great way to end off this conversation, which could go on for 2, 3, 4 hours, maybe stopping to look up a definition here and there. But But
Someone needs to bring a thesaurus next time.
right. So I thank Jennifer. I'm going to drop her a DM and let her know that we've talked about it a little bit further. But I think, yeah, great conversation, and one that we can revisit elements of again and again. And
Okay.
yeah, I just want to, I'm thinking we finish off with that feeling where we started, come full circle. When we say the word mediocre, what does that bring up for you somatically? Like, how does your body react to that? Do you get a tightness in your chest because you don't want to be mediocre, or do you go, yeah, mate, fantastic,
It's so good.
it's
Yeah.
so good, and you just relax back in, So yeah, I'd be curious to know what it brings up. Mm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Thank you, my love. Thank you to all those listening in to us. Whenever you get a chance, we appreciate you as well. And yeah, let us know how when you say the words out loud, I'm mediocre, what does that bring up for you? Yeah, I'm going to write that.
Yeah. Yeah. Report back. Homework.
Yeah. Thanks, Erica. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Anita. Have a good afternoon.
See you. Bye.
Bye.